Alright guys, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I keep forgetting things. So, before we finish this is the third video already. This is the information from the first video, the Nintendo and EA thing, and I'm going to teach you something called Terms of Trade. This is on the AP exam, usually about one question about Terms of Trade. So here's this about. Let's look back at the comparative advantage. Nintendo has the comparative advantage in the production of Game 1, and EA has the comparative advantage in the production of Game 2. So, Nintendo's better at making Game 1, and EA's better at making Game 2. So, how should they trade if they want to trade with each other? Well, since Nintendo's better at making Game 1, they'd make Game 1, and they would export Game 1. But they would import Game 2. They should give all of their production, so that means make only Game 1. So as you see up here, that means make 40 of Game 1 and 0 of Game 2. So give all production to Game 1, while EA should give all production to Game 2 because they're better at making it. And EA would export Game 2 and import Game 1. So, Nintendo would be making Game 1 and keeping some of it, giving some to EA, and EA would be making Game 2 and keeping some of it and sending some to Nintendo. That's called terms of trade. And when I said make only this because you're better at making it, that's called specialization. A fundamental theory of this, not a theory, a fundamental fact of this is that trading makes everyone better off. Everyone's better off from trading. Let me see if I can make an example of that. So Nintendo makes 40 of Game 1 and EA makes 40 of Game 2. So Nintendo would have normally had 40 of Game 1 and 30 of Game 2. Or 30 of Game 2 and nothing of Game 1. Did I mess that up? I meant 40 of Game 1, 0 of Game 2, or 30 of Game 2 and 0 of Game 1. So what they could do here is, EA normally could only make 20 of Game 1. But what they can do now is say, hey Nintendo, we want 20 of Game 1. Nintendo's going to be like, alright EA, here you go. So EA imports 20 of Game 1, and they export 20 of Game 2 to EA. So now, from their original 40 that they made, they kept 20. Same thing with EA. Since they exported 20 of Game 1 to... Nintendo. Since Nintendo exported 20 of Game 1 to EA, they have 20 left since they made 40. And they imported 20 of Game 2. So normally, they would have had 30 and either all 30 or all 40 or somewhere in between. And same thing with EA. However, now look at this. EA would have normally had either, think about it this way, they would have had 20 of Game 1 or they would have had 40 of Game 2 and none of the other. 20 of Game 1. Well, now, they have 20 of Game 1. But, instead of having 20 of Game 1 and nothing of Game 2, they also have 20 of Game 2. Because they were able to keep some of Game 2, because they're better at making that, and just import Game 1 in exchange for Game 2, which they're better at making it. So, EA benefited from this right away. And so did Nintendo. While it's hard to see here, because Nintendo can make 40 of Game 1 and 30 of Game 2, if Nintendo made all of Game 1, they'd have no of Game 2. And if they made all of Game 2, they'd have no of Game 1. So if you actually calculate this out, this makes Nintendo better off too. Because they wouldn't have been able to make this much Game 1 and this much Game 2 had they not traded with EA. So, remember this. The country with the comparative advantage in a certain game will export that game, and the country with the lower comparative advantage in the other game, Game 2, will export that, while the country with the lower opportunity cost, they'll import that game. And that's how terms of trade work. Always on the AP. Study it. Pretty easy, pretty simple. Check out the notes, and thanks for watching.